Margaret had grown used to the quiet rhythm of her evenings. At 68, she found comfort in small routines, the sound of the kettle boiling, the creak of her old wooden floors, the way the clock ticked steadily in the background as if reminding her that life was still moving forward. The autumn evening outside was calm, the sky painted in soft gray. And she was just settling down with her cup of chamomile tea when an unexpected knock at the door startled her. Her heart jumped. Few people visited her at this hour. For a moment she hesitated, unsure whether to open it. But the knock came again, firm this time, insistent, carrying with it a strange sense of urgency. Margaret set down her tea and walked quickly to the door. When she opened it, she froze. There, standing on the porch, was her grandson, Daniel. She hadn't seen him in nearly 5 years. He looked older than she remembered. Taller, his jaw more defined, his shoulders heavier with something she couldn't name. His hair was slightly damp from the drizzle outside, and his eyes, those familiar blue eyes, held a mix of warmth and sorrow that sent a shiver through her. "Grandma," he said softly, almost apologetically, I hope it's not too late." Her hand flew to her chest. For a moment, she could not find words. The boy she had once watched run through her garden was now a man. And yet something about the way he stood there, hesitant, uncertain, made him look fragile, like the child she once knew. Without another thought, she pulled the door wide open. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, "come inside, my dear." He stepped into the warmth of the house, carrying with him the scent of rain and the chill of the night air. Margaret closed the door behind him and turned to look at him properly. His clothes were travel-worn, his shoes muddy. His hands trembled slightly as he carried a small backpack over one shoulder. For years, she had wondered when or if he would come back. Letters had stopped, phone calls had grown rare, and eventually silence had replaced everything. Still, she had kept his photos on the mantel, kept his room just as it had been, hoping that one day he might walk through her door again. And now here he was, standing in her hallway, very real and yet somehow unreal at the same time. Margaret led him into the living room, her heart racing with questions. "Sit down, Daniel. You must be tired." She tried to steady her voice, though her hands trembled as she fetched another cup and poured him tea. He took the mug, holding it carefully, but his gaze never fully met hers. "What brings you here tonight?" she asked gently, though she feared the answer. He hesitated, his lips pressing together as if the words were heavy. Then he sighed. I didn't know where else to go." Something inside her clenched. The weight in his tone was not the voice of someone merely visiting. It was the voice of someone carrying a secret, someone standing at the edge of something they couldn't face alone. She leaned forward, trying to read his expression. He smiled faintly, but it was not the smile she remembered. It was tired, fragile, the kind of smile people wear when they want to hide their pain. Margaret reached for his hand across the table. "Daniel, you don't need to explain everything right now. You're safe here." Her words seemed to soften him. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he closed his eyes, as though the simple truth of being welcomed had lifted a part of his burden. Still, Margaret noticed the way his fingers tightened around the cup, the way his eyes flickered toward the window as though searching for an escape from his own thoughts. She studied him quietly. He had always been sensitive, even as a child. She remembered the way he would sit by the lake behind their old house, drawing in silence, his imagination deeper than most. But now the sensitivity she once admired seemed to weigh him down. There was a heaviness to his presence, a quiet sadness he could not disguise. The clock on the wall ticked louder, each second filling the space between them. Margaret wanted to reach out, to ask all the questions that pressed at her heart. Where had he been? Why had he stayed away? What had brought him back tonight? But she sensed it wasn't the moment. He needed space, not interrogation. Instead, she offered him food. "You must be hungry. Let me fix something warm." He shook his head quickly. "No, Grandma, I just needed to see you." The words struck her deeply. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she had longed to hear them. For years, she had feared she had lost him, that time and distance had erased the bond they once shared. But here he was, his presence proof that love, however silent, still remained. Margaret nodded, her throat tight. She didn't push further. She knew that whatever had driven him here, whatever story he carried, would reveal itself when he was ready. For now, it was enough that he was here, sitting in her living room, alive and safe. Outside, the drizzle turned to rain, the sound of it tapping against the windows, filling the silence with a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. Daniel stared into his tea, his expression thoughtful, troubled. But Margaret saw something else hidden there too, a quiet plea for comfort, for connection, for understanding. The moment felt both fragile and monumental. She had lived many years, seen many seasons of joy and sorrow. But nothing could have prepared her for the sight of her grandson arriving at her door unannounced, carrying both his past and hers in the look of his eyes. She realized then that his visit was not casual. It was not a whim. Something had pushed him to come, something strong enough to break through years of silence. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities. He had said he had nowhere else to go. What did that mean? What had happened in his life to bring him here, to her doorstep on this rainy night? Her heart ached with both fear and hope. Fear for what pain he might reveal, and hope that this visit might heal wounds she hadn't even known still bled. As Daniel lifted his eyes to hers, finally, after long minutes of silence, Margaret felt the air shift. The moment was about to change. The truth was close, hovering like a storm on the horizon. And though she didn't know what he was about to say, she knew one thing with certainty. This unexpected arrival was going to alter both their lives forever. The rain outside deepened, streaking the windows with silver trails. Daniel sat hunched on the sofa, his tea untouched, his fingers tapping nervously on the side of the cup. Margaret watched him closely. She saw the way his jaw tightened, the way he seemed to wrestle with words he couldn't bring himself to say. The silence between them stretched, heavy but fragile, like glass about to break. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice soft. "Daniel, you don't have to hold it all in. You came here for a reason. You can tell me anything." He drew in a shaky breath, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I've made mistakes," he whispered. The words seemed to cost him something. His shoulders sank lower, his hand trembled. And Margaret felt her chest ache, just hearing the crack in his voice. She wanted to comfort him. She knew pushing too hard might make him retreat. So she simply placed her hand over his, grounding him. He flinched at first, then slowly stilled, as if the small touch reminded him of safety he thought he'd lost. "I tried to build a life," said after a pause, his voice uneven. "I worked hard. I thought I had everything figured out. But it fell apart faster than I could stop it." His eyes flickered up to hers for just a second before darting away. "I lost my job, Grandma, and then I lost her too." Margaret's breath caught. The pain in his tone revealed more than his words. Whoever she was, she had clearly left a mark so deep it still bled. "You loved her," Margaret said softly. Filling the silence, he couldn't. He nodded, his lips pressed tight, his throat working as if the memories were too raw to speak of. "I thought she was the one. I thought we'd last." He swallowed hard, blinking against the tears threatening to spill. But love doesn't keep people. Not always. Margaret's heart ached. She remembered being young, believing love was enough to conquer everything, only to learn that love could also slip through your fingers no matter how tightly you held on. She remembered her own heartbreaks, letters she had written but never sent, promises that had faded with time. The same ache she had once carried now stared back at her through her grandson's eyes. She squeezed his hand gently. "Love changes us, Daniel. It doesn't disappear even when people do. What you feel now, the pain means you cared deeply. That is not a weakness. That is proof you're alive." Daniel shook his head. "It doesn't feel that way. It feels like failure." His voice cracked. "I gave everything and I still lost her. And when the job went to, I didn't know how to keep standing. I kept hearing your voice in my head, the way you always told me that love, no matter how it ends, teaches us something. So I came here. I didn't know what else to do." Margaret's throat tightened. She hadn't realized he had carried her words with him all these years. Tears pricked her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "You are right to come here. You are never alone, Daniel. Not as long as I'm here." The fire in the hearth crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. Daniel leaned back, running a hand over his face. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want to show up broken." Margaret gave a small smile. "You forget raised your father, your uncle, and you. I've seen broken before, and I know this. Broken things can be mended. Sometimes they come back stronger than before." Margaret, too, drifted into her own thoughts. She remembered the years after her husband passed, the endless nights when loneliness felt like a second skin. She remembered thinking she would never laugh again, never find joy in the simple things. But she had survived, learned to live, even found light again in the small routines of her days. Looking at Daniel now, she saw that same fight, the same need to believe that the pain wouldn't last forever. The rain outside slowed, the storm easing, though the heaviness in the room remained. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quieter, steadier. "I don't even know who I am anymore. Without her, without the job, I feel like I lost myself." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes shining with quiet strength. "Then this is your chance to find yourself again. Not the man you thought you needed to be for her, not the man you thought you had to be for work. Just Daniel. My grandson. The boy who once painted sunsets by the lake and dreamed of building something beautiful. That boy is still inside you." Her words struck something deep. For the first time that evening, Daniel looked directly at her. The sadness in his gaze was still there. But behind it was something else, something searching, almost hopeful. Margaret held his gaze. "Life doesn't end because we stumble. Sometimes the stumble is what points us to a different path. You don't need to run from the pain, Daniel. Let it teach you. Let it shape you. But don't let it define you." The clock chimed softly, reminding them how long they had been sitting there. But neither moved. The conversation had shifted something. Cracked open a place Daniel had kept locked for too long at last. Daniel exhaled a long, tired breath. "I don't know what's next, but I know I don't want to keep carrying this alone." Margaret smiled, her tears finally falling. "Then don't. That's why I'm here." The words hung in the air, warm and steady, like a promise. And in that moment, as the rain faded and silence wrapped gently around them, Margaret realized this was more than her grandson's healing. This was hers too. His pain mirrored the ache she had buried for years, and in comforting him, she felt her own heart lighten. The night grew quieter. The fire softened to embers. Daniel leaned back, his posture less tense, his breathing easier. Margaret watched him, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Whatever story he still carried, whatever pieces he hadn't yet revealed, she knew this was only the beginning. His unexpected arrival was no accident, it was a turning point for both of them. And deep in her heart, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past and present were about to intertwine in ways she never imagined. The night stretched long, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, tapping lightly against the windows, while inside the fire gave the room a warm glow. Daniel sat slouched in the armchair, staring into the flames as if searching for answers there. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched. And Margaret could see the struggle warring inside him. She wanted to reach out, but she knew better than to rush him. He had carried whatever pain this was for too long. It had to come out on its own. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I don't even know how to say it. Every time I try, the words get stuck." Margaret leaned closer, her tone steady. "Start small. Start with what hurts the most." He swallowed hard, his eyes flickering to hers before darting back to the fire. "It wasn't just losing her grandma. It was everything that came after. I thought love was enough, but I was wrong. She wanted more than I could give. When the job fell apart, she said she couldn't live with someone who was stuck." He let out a bitter laugh. That was her word, stuck. Margaret's heart tightened. The way he said it, the way the words seemed to echo in his chest, told her it wasn't just a memory, it was a wound. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, restless. I tried to fight for us. I begged her to stay. I told her I'd fix it, I'd find something else, I'd make it right. But she just looked at me like I wasn't enough. His voice cracked at the last word. And then she left. Just like that. One day we were planning a future, and the next day she was gone. His eyes shimmered, but he blinked back the tears fiercely, as though ashamed to let them fall. Margaret reached across the small table between them, her hand brushing his knuckles. Losing someone you love is like losing a piece of yourself. But Daniel, her leaving does not mean you weren't enough. It means she wasn't ready to stand where you were. He shook his head, unable to accept it. It doesn't matter why. The result's the same. She's gone. The job's gone. And I'm here, sitting in your living room because I couldn't hold my life together. His voice grew sharper, almost angry, but the anger wasn't at her. It was at himself. Margaret stayed calm, letting his words pour out. She recognized this storm. She had lived through it herself long ago, when grief made her lash out at everything around her. When loneliness made her question her worth. She remembered nights of crying into her pillow, wondering if love had ever really been hers at all. Her voice was gentle, but firm. Daniel, listen to me. You are not broken because someone walked away. You are not a failure because life turned. Love doesn't guarantee forever, but it always leaves us with something: strength, wisdom, a clearer picture of who we are. For the first time, Daniel's tears fell. He covered his face with both hands, his body shaking as the weight he had been holding finally slipped free. Margaret rose from her chair and crossed the room. She knelt beside him, her arms wrapping around his shoulders, holding him the way she had when he was small and frightened. He let go then, sobbing quietly, letting the pain bleed into the open air instead of suffocating inside. Margaret's own eyes blurred as she held him, her heart breaking not only for his sorrow but for the memories it awoke in her own secret heartbreak, one she had kept locked away for decades. When Daniel finally pulled back, his face was pale, his eyes red, but something about him looked lighter, as if releasing the truth had loosened the chains around his chest. He sank back against the chair, exhausted. I don't even know why I'm telling you all this. I haven't said a word to anyone else. Margaret sat beside him now, her voice steady. Because you knew I would listen. Because you needed to let it out somewhere safe. He nodded faintly, staring into the fire again. I thought love was supposed to save us. I thought it was supposed to make everything worth it. But instead, it just tore me apart. Margaret let the silence linger before speaking. Love is not here to save us, Daniel. It's here to teach us. Sometimes it gives us joy, sometimes it gives us pain, but always it shows us something about who we are and what we need. Daniel's lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. So what has it taught me? That I can give everything and still lose. Margaret shook her head gently. No, it has taught you that your heart is capable of giving deeply, that you are brave enough to try, even knowing it might hurt. That kind of courage is rare. And one day it will guide you to someone who sees you as enough exactly as you are. His eyes softened, the bitterness fading into something quieter, something like hope, though fragile. He sat there, breathing slowly, her words settling in his heart. Margaret leaned back, her own thoughts swirling. She had never told Daniel about the heartbreaks of her youth, about the man she once thought she would marry before life pulled them apart. She had never told him about the nights she cried alone after her husband passed, or the way she still sometimes whispered his name in the empty rooms. But as she sat there, she realized his pain was not just his. It was a mirror of her own past. The storm outside had faded, leaving the world quiet, as though listening. Margaret placed her hand over Daniel's once more. You came here because you needed to remember that love doesn't end when people leave. Love stays inside us, waiting to grow again. Tonight, you're not alone in that. I carry this same truth. Daniel looked at her sharply, his eyes searching. You too. She smiled sadly. Yes, different story, same lesson. That's why I can tell you you will survive this. And you will love again. For a long while, they sat in silence, the fire burning low. Daniel's breathing steadied, his eyes softer now. The raw pain dulled into something bearable. Margaret felt a strange peace, as though by comforting him. She had soothed something inside herself as well. The night was no longer just about his heartbreak. It was about hers too, unspoken but shared. It was about two generations bound not only by blood but by the same fragile truth that love could wound. But it could also heal if you let it. As the clock struck midnight, Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." Margaret brushed his hair back gently, her heart full. "Rest now, Daniel. Tomorrow will look different." And as he closed his eyes, leaning into the safety of her home, Margaret knew that his visit was not simply about his healing. It was also the beginning of hers. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, bright and golden, chasing away the weight of the night before. Margaret woke early, as she always did, but this time she wasn't alone in the house. For the first time in years, she heard footsteps upstairs. It's the soft creak of floorboards that reminded her of when Daniel used to visit as a boy. The sound filled her with both nostalgia and a strange, tender hope. She moved quietly into the kitchen, putting the kettle on the stove. As steam began to rise, she looked out at the garden her late husband had once cared for. The roses had grown wild, the soil no longer tended. But in the morning light, it seemed alive again, waiting for hands to bring it back to life. When Daniel appeared in the doorway, he looked different. His clothes were the same, his hair still damp from the shower. But his eyes carried less of the heavy sadness she'd seen last night. There was still weariness in him, but also something new. A flicker of determination that hadn't been there before. "Good morning." Margaret greeted softly. Daniel offered a small smile. "Good morning, Grandma." She poured tea into 2 cups and set one in front of him. They sat at the table, the quiet between them no longer heavy, but gentle. "I couldn't sleep much," Daniel admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "I kept thinking about everything I said last night. It felt like I was finally letting it out, but also, I kept wondering what comes next." Margaret nodded. "That's natural. When we finally face our pain, we start to see the space it leaves behind. That space can feel frightening, but it's also where new life begins." He listened carefully, his gaze steady on her. "I don't want to keep running, Grandma. I've been moving from one thing to another, hoping I wouldn't have to face myself. But last night, I realized I can't keep doing that. I can't keep living like I've lost everything." Margaret smiled faintly. "You haven't lost everything, Daniel. You still have your heart, your courage, your ability to begin again. And you still have me." His eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked like the boy she remembered. Running through the garden with scraped knees and a wild laugh. But then his expression turned thoughtful. "I don't know if I can go back to who I was before. I feel changed. Like I've crossed a line I can't return from." Margaret reached across the table, her hand resting gently over his. "You're not meant to go back. You're meant to grow. Change is painful, but it's also proof that you're alive. The man you were yesterday is not the man you are today. That is how we become who we're meant to be." Her words sank into him. He nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around hers. "Then maybe this is the beginning, not the end." The kettle whistled softly on the stove, the sound blending with the morning bird song outside. Margaret rose to fetch more hot water, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For so long she had lived with quiet grief, keeping her own loneliness tucked away. But Daniel's return, his honesty, had unlocked something inside her. She had spent years believing her best days were behind her. Now she wondered if she was wrong when she returned to the table. Daniel was looking out the window at the overgrown garden. "Grandpa used to spend hours out there," he said. "I remember helping him plant those roses when I was a kid. They don't look the same anymore." "No," Margaret agreed, glancing at the wild bushes. but they're still alive. They just need care again. Daniel's voice was soft, but certain, kind of like me. The words caught Margaret off guard, filling her eyes with tears. She reached over and touched his cheek. Exactly like you. The two of them shared breakfast in quiet peace. Afterward, Daniel insisted on stepping outside to look at the garden more closely. Margaret followed him, watching as he crouched down, brushing dirt from the base of the rose bushes. The sight reminded her of his grandfather, the same posture, the same careful hands. For a moment, it was as if time had folded, past and present, blending into one. Daniel stood again, wiping his hands on his jeans. I think I'd like to fix this. Start here with the garden. It feels like something I can do, something real. Maybe if I can bring this back, I can bring myself back too. Margaret felt her heart swell with pride. Then let's do it together. We'll start small, one step at a time. The day passed slowly but beautifully. They trimmed branches, cleared weeds, turned soil. Their hands grew dirty, but their hearts felt lighter. Daniel laughed once, unexpectedly, when Margaret scolded him for missing a stubborn weed. And the sound echoed through the garden like a promise of healing as the sun set, painting the sky in pink and gold. They sat side by side on the porch, sipping tea. Daniel looked out at the clean beds of soil, the roses now free to breathe. It feels different already, he said. Like the garden knew I needed this. Margaret glanced at him, her voice full of warmth. Or maybe you knew the garden needed you. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. For the first time in a long time, Margaret saw hope written across his face. Silence stretched comfortably between them. The crickets began to sing, and the first stars appeared in the fading sky. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I don't know where I'm going next, Grandma, but I know I don't want to keep hiding. I want to live again, even if it means taking small steps. Margaret touched his arm gently. That's all any of us can do. One step at a time. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It grows, just like those roses. And just like love. Daniel looked at her then, his gaze steady, grateful. I think I understand now. Love doesn't vanish when it ends. It stays, shaping us, waiting for us to use it again. You were right, Grandma. Love changes, but it never disappears. Margaret's eyes glistened. She nodded, her voice soft. Yes, my dear. And as long as we let it guide us, we'll never truly be lost. The night settled around them, calm and reassuring. Margaret felt a quiet joy, knowing that Daniel's visit had brought them both something they needed. He had found a place to begin again, and she had found a reminder that love still lived within her. Even after all these years, it no longer felt unreal that he had come to her door unexpectedly. It felt destined, as if life had chosen this moment for both of them to rediscover what it meant to love, to lose and to grow again. And as they sat there together, beneath the stars, Margaret knew the future would hold challenges. But it would also hold light, because love, even when broken, always found a way back home.